Hey, what's up guys, how's it going? Welcome to the Build Your Own Blog video series where I will show you how to create a JAMstack blog with React and Nextjs. In the previous video, we have built the homepage UI, but in today's video, we are not going to do any kind of coding. We're going to understand what static site generation is, why it is useful, and we will have a brief introduction about how our app will work. So before we get started, please consider like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss the next videos. So without further ado, let's get started. Before we understand what static site generation is, we have to understand how the web actually works. So we have this client, which is normally your browser. The browser will send a request to the server for an HTML page. For example, this blog.html page. Then the server started creating that HTML page, but the blog.html file needs some external data like a database. So the server fetched some data from the database, and then the server used those data to build this HTML file. After building, the server sends this HTML file as a response. This is what we call server-side rendering. If you want to learn more about server-side rendering, I have a video about it. You can check that out. But what is the problem with this approach? Well, server-side rendering is kinda slow. Now you might ask why? Well, let's see. So every time the client sends a request to the server, the whole process gets repeated. The server creates the HTML file, it fetches some data. After building the file, it returns that HTML file. So this whole process takes some time. But it kinda makes sense. But it doesn't make sense in one scenario. Suppose the HTML file that needs some external data is static. That means the data doesn't change much. For example, if you write a blog post, you rarely edit the blog post after you publish the blog. So if the data doesn't change much, it would be totally unnecessary to fetch the exact data every single request time. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we solve this problem with static site generation. Now, what if we can create the HTML page at the build time, not on the request time? At the build time, we fetch all of the necessary data from outside sources like database. Then we put those data in the HTML page and build them. After that, when we deploy our application to the server, and if the client sends a request for that HTML page, the server will be able to send that HTML file really quickly because the HTML page is already built. It doesn't need to fetch some data from outside sources. We don't need to do the unnecessary process, which saves us a lot of time. That's why static sites are really fast. So that's how static site generation works. If you don't understand and if you have some question, please drop them on the comment section. I'll try to answer them. But how do we really make our web page static in Nextjs? Well, it is pretty easy. You just have to export a function called getStaticProps from the page file, whatever page you want to make static. For example, if you want to make the home page static page, you have to export a getStaticProps function from the index.js file. And inside that getStaticProps function, you will run all of your server-side logic like fetching data from a database. After that, you will return some data as props, and that props will be available to the page component. After that, you can use that props however you want, and your web page will be now static. So that's how static site generation works with Nextjs. Now let's see how our app actually will work. And now the process that I'm going to show you will happen at the home page, and the process will run only at the build time. So this is our development computer, and our computer has a file system, and inside this file system we have these markdown files. Like I've told you, our content will be written in Markdown, or more specifically MDX. So each of this Markdown file will have two types of data. First, it will have the front matter, and then it will have the actual blog content. The front matter is just some additional information about the blog, like title, description, banner path, and things like that. So on the server side, our server will parse these Markdown files, and it will store the blog content in our database, which is MongoDB. After storing the data in our database, we can fetch the blog data from our database from any page. For example, we will need the blog data in our blog page, so we can just fetch the blog data from our database. and this whole process will run on the getStaticProps function. And remember, getStaticProps function only run at the build time on server side. So after storing the data on our database, we will fetch some data from the database. We will fetch the top viewed blogs data and the recent blogs data. And then we will send those data as props to our page component, and that's how our home page will be static. So that's how we will store our data in the database, and we will make our home page static. Now what about the blog page? Well, on the blog page, this process will not happen. On the blog page, we will have the getStaticProps function, but inside the getStaticProps function, we will fetch a specific blog data from our database. In the blog page, we will use something called dynamic routing. Now basically, a dynamic route is a route where some part of the URL doesn't stay static, doesn't stay fixed, it changes. For example, if you want to visit our Twitter profile, you will go twitter.com/the username, like that on John, which is my account. If you want to visit Elon Musk profile, then you go twitter.com/the Elon Musk profile name. So the twitter.com is static part, and the rest of the route is the dynamic part, and which is also called slug. So we will get the slug from the request object in the getStaticProps function, and with the slug we will fetch the blog data from our database, and we will return it as props to the component, and that's how our blog page will be static. So that's how really our app will work. If you think it's complicated, it is actually not. If you watch the next two videos, you will realize how easy the process is. So that's what I really wanted to show you. So before I end this video, please consider like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss the next videos. So until then, stay safe, goodbye.